When we think of Latin literature, we usually think of Virgil, Ovid, Cicero, or Caesar. These names dominate the canon and their works have shaped Western thought for 2000 years. But the literary world of ancient Rome was far larger than what survives today. Entire epics, tragedies, comedies, histories, and philosophical treatises have been lost. Some authors are remembered only by name, others survive in a few quoted lines preserved by later scholars. What we read today is not the totality of Roman literature, but a narrow selection that happened to make it through centuries of copying, neglect, and destruction. This is a story of Latin literature that vanished, the books we know once existed but can no longer read. The survival of ancient literature depended on fragile materials and even more fragile traditions of transmission. Roman authors wrote on papyrus scrolls, which could deteriorate within decades in the damp climate of Europe. Later codices made of parchment were more durable, but the shift from scroll to book meant many older texts were abandoned. By the Middle Ages, preservation depended almost entirely on monastic scriptoria. Monks selected which texts to copy, often choosing Christian works or morally useful classics. A technical work on agriculture or a coarse comedy was less likely to survive. Fires, invasions, and the collapse of libraries, like for example the Library of Alexandria, accelerated the process of loss. What remains is not necessarily what Rome thought was the best, but what later ages found valuable, or simply what happened to be in the right place at the right time. Epic poetry was once the backbone of Roman cultural memory, but much of it has disappeared. Before Virgil's Aeneid, Ennius composed the Annals, an 18-book epic that told Rome's story from its mythical Trojan origins to his own lifetime in the 2nd century BC. Ennius was revered as the father of Roman poetry. Cicero quoted him constantly, and schoolboys studied him for centuries. Today, only a few hundred lines survive, preserved fragmentarily in later authors. We also know of Naevius, who wrote the Bellum Punicum, an epic about the First Punic War, blending Roman history with myth. Like the Annals, it survives only in fragments. Later epics are also missing. We hear about poems by Cornelius, Severus, Varius, Rufus, and others who wrote works meant to rival Virgil. Only scraps remain. Without them, our view of Roman epic is distorted, focused on the handful that survived copying in the imperial and medieval periods. The loss of Roman drama is even greater. We possess 20 comedies of Plautus and 6 of Terence, but these represent a fraction of what was once a flourishing theatrical tradition. Ancient sources tell us that Plautus alone wrote over 100 plays, and almost all of them are lost. Roman tragedy is even worse off. We know of Pacuvius and Accius, leading tragic writers of the 2nd century BC who adopted Greek myths into Latin verse and developed distinctly Roman themes. Titles such as Atreus, Antiope, and Brutus survive, but the plays themselves are lost, leaving us only a few hundred quoted lines. Seneca's tragedies survive complete, but they were likely written for recitation, not stage performance, meaning we cannot reconstruct the actual experience of Roman theater. Imagine if we had a full set of Roman tragedies, then we could compare them with Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides and see how Rome reshaped Greek myth for its own audience. Instead, we only have a few echoes. Our understanding of Roman history is shaped just as much by what is missing as by what has survived. Livi's Ab Urbe Condita originally spanned 142 books, telling Rome's story from its foundation to its own era under Augustus. Today, only 35 books survive in full, and we do have a few summaries of others. The missing volumes include detailed accounts of early Rome and the Republic's expansion, stories that would have given us first-hand insight into how Romans remembered their past. Sallust's histories survive in fragments, depriving us of his narrative of Rome in the chaotic 70s BC. Tacitus wrote the Annals and Histories, but large sections are missing, including the end of Tiberius's reign, Caligula's entire reign, and most of Nero's reign. Entire chronicles by other historians are known only by name. What we think of as Roman history is therefore a patchwork of survivors, summaries, and quotations. Even more staggering is the loss of Rome's intellectual literature. Cicero, who shaped Latin prose more than any other, wrote dozens of philosophical works and only about half survive. His treatises on logic, theology, and natural philosophy are gone, leaving us with tantalizing references in later authors. Marcus Terentius Varro, perhaps the most learned Roman of all, produced over 600 books on subjects ranging from grammar and etymology to agriculture, religion, and antiquities. Augustine called him the most knowledgeable of all Romans, but today we have only fragments of his work. Scientific and technical writings fared no better. Pliny the Elder's natural history survived, but most other encyclopedias did not. Frontinus wrote on military strategy and aqueducts, Columella on agriculture, Vitruvius on architecture. We are lucky to have these works, but for each survivor there are dozens more we know of only by title or citation. The loss of these works is not simply a matter of curiosity. It shapes the way we understand Roman culture. Without Ennius, our view of Roman epic is dominated by Virgil, making him seem unique when he was really part of a larger continuum. Without Pacuvius and Accius, Roman tragedy looks thin compared to Greek tragedy, though in reality it was once a thriving genre. Without the missing books of Livy, we rely on much later summaries for Rome's early history, and without Varro, we miss Rome's own encyclopedia of itself. The picture of Roman literature that survives is therefore biased toward a narrow canon. We study Cicero, Virgil, Ovid, and Tacitus because they were preserved, not because they were the only great Roman authors. The canon is an accident of survival. The lost works of Latin literature reminds us that cultural memory is fragile. Scrolls can burn, libraries can be neglected, and entire genres can vanish because no one bothered to copy them. Yet even in loss, these works matter. We glimpse them in quotations, summaries, and passing references, and in those fragments we see a much richer, more complex Roman world than the one preserved in our textbooks. To recover even a line of Ennius or a title from Varro is to open a window onto that vanished world. What survives is precious, but what is gone reminds us of how much more there once was, and how much of antiquity remains out of reach forever.